Hello and welcome to the Pitchless Selling Podcast. It's the podcast where we talk about sales, business strategies, and a little bit of personal motivation mixed in there. So if you're a salesperson, if you're maybe a budding entrepreneur, or heck, you're just someone looking for a little extra motivation to get you through the day, you've come to the right place. I'm Josh Hein. I'm the founder of Liftoff and creator of the Pitchless Selling Sales Framework and Methodology. And our company, Liftoff, trains salespeople worldwide on tips and tricks and a very specific selling framework, helps them sell more and make customers a whole lot happier. So thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is one that I think needs to be talked about and needs to be addressed. This is a sales strategy, a sales technique that I think a lot of salespeople, especially newer salespeople, need to hear. So, and look, this is a great reminder, even if you've been in sales for your entire career, and heck, maybe you're 30, 40 years in at this point. This podcast episode today should give you some good tips and tricks and maybe serve as a reminder for you on how to approach this. So, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much for being here. I want to talk to you about, today I want to talk to you about what I call asking the tough questions. Okay. And so I think oftentimes salespeople are afraid to push. I think they're afraid to upset a prospect or challenge a prospect, right? They've been taught, or their perception is that they just need to be agreeable. They need to be happy and positive, and they can't ever tell a prospect they're wrong or challenge a prospect to think differently. Or, it's a very old school way of selling, I think. And frankly, it's a little bit of an order taker mentality, right? Where you're not willing to ask the tough questions. You're not willing to dig deep. You're not willing to challenge somebody, really pushing them to think differently about something. And so what I want to talk to you today is about sort of flipping that old school thought process on its head. I want to talk about, don't be afraid to challenge people, pushing people to think differently, prospects to think differently, challenging the things that they're saying to you, right? This is a good thing. As a salesperson, the most value that you can add to a prospect interaction is to get them to leave the call thinking differently about things than they thought when they started the call. So think about this for a second, right? Prospect joins the call with you, or you have a sales conversation with a prospect, right? And whether or not they came with problems or issues that they knew they were having, or really anything that they knew about their business or personal situation coming into this, if you spend the entire sales conversation just talking about things that they already know about their business or about their personal situation, well, what value are they really getting out of that, right? They're not really learning anything. They're not thinking differently about anything. It's not, the conversation is of no value to them. If all they're doing is talking about themselves, and you're great, good for you, by the way. You need to get them talking about themselves. So I'm not saying that to skip that or to not do that. That's important, okay? But if all they're doing is talking about their current situation and telling you stuff that they already know, by the time that sales conversation is over, what have they gained from that? How have you helped them? Even if they don't buy. I'm talking about even if they don't buy from you. Now, as I go on through this podcast, the stuff I'm going to talk about will help you sell more. But inevitably, somebody's going to say no to you. You're not going to sell every opportunity. And if it's me, if I don't sell somebody, I still want them leaving with having a good experience with me or with my company or whatever, right? I want them to have a good perception, a good idea of who I am, right? I want to have made a good impression on them. And there's several reasons for that. One, maybe maybe they're talking to someone else who has a problem that they know we fix, and boom, they had a great experience with us, so now it's a referral. They're going to refer someone, our way, right? Or maybe in the future, their needs change. Boom, I want them coming back to me. All right. So if that's the case, and if I want someone to have a good experience with me and a good impression of me, one of the best ways you can add value on a call or in a sales conversation with someone is to get them to think about things differently, to get them to view things about their personal situation or their business differently than they did before they came into the call. So, look, at the end of the day, people are busy, right? They're not thinking about whatever it is you're selling. That's not the main, they're not thinking about that all day, every day, like you are. So if that's the case, this is a small portion of their day, right? They've got a million other things going on. And so they're not spending the time diving deep and thinking about this specific issue or this specific problem or this specific need. So if you take that time with them and you're actually focused on whatever part of their business it is or their personal life it is, and you're actually devoting the time to helping them strategically think through that, especially if you're in B2B sales. Listen, if you're in B2B sales, this is something you absolutely have to do. You have got to take the time to walk a prospect through and get them thinking about these issues, their current situation, all these things differently than they've ever thought about them before. You have to challenge the way they view them. Ask them to think more deeply. Treat it like a strategic brainstorming session. Now you're adding value. You're not just a salesperson, right? All right. That's one part of challenging and asking the tough questions. By the way, the whole asking tough questions thing, we're going to get to later in this podcast, so stay tuned for that, because this is a big, big problem that a lot of salespeople have. They're scared to ask the tough questions. So I know I've said that a couple times. I promise I will get back to that. That's going to come later, so stay tuned. I want to stick to the challenger side of this. So the other side of the challenger side of things is not being afraid to disagree with a prospect, okay? Not being afraid to urge them or challenge them to think differently about something. And so this has come several different times in sales conversations for me. I love this type of selling. I love the opportunity, getting the opportunity to actually challenge a prospect. Now, let me be clear here. When I'm saying challenge a prospect, this is completely non-confrontational. Am I right? You have to be like, this isn't a you versus me thing. This isn't like we're butting heads here. Like, you're wrong, I'm right. Don't go down that road. That ain't it. So that's not what we're trying to accomplish. When I say challenger, when you're challenging them, it's more of just, hey, had you thought about this? Had you thought about it this way? And then if you've done your job, and again, this is look, the podcast, this is just a small chunk. In our training sessions, we go through this in depth. But if you do the everything right up until this point, if you've done your job and you've got, good rapport built, if you've created a good relationship, an open relationship with this prospect where you can speak freely, the better relationship you have created, the more trust you've established, all of those things, it will allow you to now be in a position where they view you as an equal, right? They're not looking necessarily like looking down on you or looking at you as just trying to sell something, right? Or just a salesperson. If they really believe that you're in this with them, this is the key. If you're in it with them, trying to help, if they believe that you are genuinely trying to help them, that will free you up to get a little bit more direct with the way you challenge them. And so here's an example of how I used to challenge people when they were going down and look, again, this can be any point of your sales conversation, not just for objection handling, not just for negotiating, not just when, someone's trying to tell you no, or tell you why they don't need this. Any point throughout a sales conversation where a prospect is saying something that either you don't agree with, that isn't true, or that isn't going to keep you focused, keep you, traveling down the path that you need them to go down for you to make the sale. Don't be afraid. Don't just let that slip by, right? Don't just let them go down that path. Go ahead and challenge them. And this is the part where salespeople often won't do that, right? They just, especially newer salespeople, they're afraid to disagree, or they're afraid to call someone out, or to get someone mad at them, or get a prospect. Again, they don't want any tension there. I would argue that if you are doing your job correctly, the prospect would respect the fact that you're challenging them. Okay? So this is what I'm talking about. Here's an example of how I used to challenge people. For example, if someone were saying something that I didn't necessarily agree with. And again, this isn't a very specific example. This is a general example. But if a prospect were, let's say they're saying, Josh, I understand, I think I understand your product, your offering, but boom, right? Whatever that is, doesn't matter what that thing is. If it's something that you disagree with and you know where you want them to go, you could just simply say, I might challenge the way you're thinking about that. Had you considered this? Or the thing I love to do is take the negative thing that they're saying, use the same line that I just gave you. I actually might challenge, Dave, I might actually challenge the way you're thinking about that and say that actually might be a positive aspect of this for you. And then here's why, right? And so that was the beauty. I mean, people that would switch people so fast as long as you have a good, positive, explanation that you can give for why you're challenging them. That works great. That line that I just gave you right there works great. And so again, if you missed it, the line is just, and by the way, watch my tone here, watch my pacing, watch my pausing. We're not going to go through all that right now. That's a topic for a different day. Or we talk about tone, body language, and pacing, and all those sort of communication components in our level 1 and level 2 pitchless selling program. So, by all means, if this is interesting to you and you think this would help, you want to learn more, go ahead and jump in our programs and learn what you can there. So, but pay attention to that. Pay attention to my tone, my pacing here. So, hey, Dave, I might actually challenge the way you're thinking about that. I think that might actually be a positive. And here's kind of the way I see it. Tell me what you think. And you explain it, boom, what the positive is, right? So if they're telling you something negative, if they're going down this negative road, first of all, stop them. Don't be afraid to stop them. Challenge it. Don't interrupt. Don't be rude. But I'm saying stop that way of thinking, right? Don't let the snowball start picking up momentum and going downhill. Next thing you know, they've completely shut themselves down. They've sold themselves on not buying, right? So challenge them. And using the actual words, hey, Dave, I might actually challenge the way you're thinking about that. And then you can spin it whichever way you want. Now, the other thing you can do is getting them to talk, getting them to critically think about this themselves is the best thing you can do. So again, the first example I gave you there was me taking something they were saying that was negative, challenging it in a good way, and flipping it into something positive, right? So it's like, hey, I might challenge the way you're thinking about this. I actually think that might be a benefit for you. That actually might be a positive, and here's why. Okay? But the second thing that you can do in terms of challenging is tell them, you can use the same line, hey, I might challenge the way you're thinking about that, but then immediately follow that with an open-ended question to get them thinking about it, right? So if you're going to stop them and you're going to challenge them, this is the opportunity to get them to critically think about whatever it is that they're talking about, right? So the let me challenge the way you're thinking about that kind of snap, whoa, hey, ho, snaps them out of it, right? In their brain. I mean, they're hopefully not physically doing that. That probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense for those of you who are just listening to this podcast. But if you're watching this podcast on our YouTube channel, you'll know what I was doing there. So anyway, hopefully they don't physically do that. But if you're challenging them, what it's doing in the brain is it's a signal interrupt, right? It's a pattern interrupter. Whatever path that they were on, whatever line of thinking that they were going down that you didn't like, you stop that line of thinking, right? Challenge that. I'm not, hey, Dave, I might challenge the way you're thinking about that. And then you immediately follow it with an open-ended question. Something like, had you considered what this might do to your process, or what benefit might that actually have to your process, or can you tell me more about what you meant by this, or explain this to me, right? So any of those sort of, this doesn't have to be I think a lot of times salespeople, they get caught up like, I just can't do this. I see this actually a lot in trainings where I'll be going through a concept and I see salespeople that we have a lot of different exercises we do where salespeople get an opportunity to write down different things and practice writing their own scripts and writing their own sort of questions and stuff. And I see salespeople it's like, oh, they're getting this like massive headache, like they just can't wrap their mind around. Their mind is in a pretzel trying to come up with the right question or the right words to say. Guys, it doesn't have to be that hard, right? You can ask a short, generic, open-ended question that does one of two things. It either gets them talking, right, and thinking about things more critically, or at a minimum, it's going to buy you time by asking that short, open-ended question. It's going to buy you time to let them sort of talk through it, while you can also listen to what they're saying and formulate maybe a more pointed question that you want to ask, right? So I might challenge the way you're thinking about that. Now tell me a little bit about what you meant when you said, boom, right? There you go. I mean, that's simple, right? It doesn't have to be a very specific, very pointed question. Just something to get them thinking, just to open up the conversation, get them thinking about it. All right? So those are the two sort of ways I talk about challenging someone or challenging a prospect in the right way, right? So you've got the really pushing a prospect to open up or completely change the way they're thinking about it, and maybe trying to push them the way you want them to go by actually saying what that is, right? By telling them what it is. And then you've got the other side, which is more of a passive approach where you're getting them to think through it critically themselves, right? Where you're asking a question and letting them arrive, hopefully, where you want them to arrive. And so some of the most successful salespeople I've seen are people who have absolutely mastered those two components. They're able to challenge people and tell them where to go without that prospect understanding or seeing that that's what they're trying to accomplish, right? Because that's the other thing, is if you do this in a way where it's very obvious, or you're just like directly telling someone like, no, you're wrong and this is why. Well, that's not going to go very well in pretty much any circumstance, right? So people who have mastered that ability to challenge the way someone is thinking and then tell them where to go and how to think, and they've mastered the ability to get a prospect to flip their way of thinking by critically thinking through something, but ultimately arriving at the point that they wanted them to arrive at, right? So if you're a salesperson, you know where you want them to go. You know where you're trying to get them. If you can get someone to get there on their own, that's a whole lot better than trying to tell someone, the answer, or trying to force your way in. If it can be their idea, or if you can get them to get there on their own, that's a whole lot better, right? And so those two skills, that skill of challenging without being rude or pushy or salesy or obviously salesy, right? Those things are absolutely critical to modern day selling, I would say. New age selling, right? The old school way of just crushing people and just bullying them, with emotion and excitement and trying to. And actually, we have another podcast episode where we talk a little bit about, conviction and passion and stuff like that. But the days of selling where you can, it's just all about yeses and it's all about energy and getting people fired up and you got to get all these yeses in a row. It doesn't work like that. So don't be afraid to challenge. Now, speaking of don't be afraid. Okay, this is the other thing. I said I would come back to this. Don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. I cannot tell you how many times I have seen salespeople who are just scared to ask the tough questions directly. And when I say tough questions, I'm talking in general, questions in general. Like, for example, if someone's giving you something negative or giving you negative feedback or going down a negative path, a prospect is afraid to say, well, why do you think that? Why do you think that way? Right? Or, when we're talking about the decision-making process, for example, right? And someone is, at mid-level in the decision-making process, not the actual decision-maker, whatever it is, they're afraid to very directly ask someone about the next steps and about taking it to the boss or taking it to the next step in the decision-making process, right? They're afraid to ask the tough questions about budgeting. And so part of this whole challenge, or the reason I'm bringing that up now, by the way, asking the tough questions is another topic that we dive deep into in the program, but I'm bringing it up today in this podcast episode because I think the mindset you have to have in order to ask the tough questions, by the way, asking for the business directly, not beating around the bush, but like asking for someone's business. For some reason, some salespeople have a hard time with that. They want to like go in circles and beat around the bush and then finally sort of imply that they're asking for someone's business. Just ask the question. Just ask for the business, right? Anyway, the mindset you have to ask the tough questions and to challenge someone are the same, right? So you might have heard of a selling style, more popular, I would say, years ago. And there are several different types of selling styles, but this selling style called relationship selling, right? Where, the whole goal was to basically, build a great relationship and connection with someone, and then leverage that relationship and bond and trust and things that you've created to make the sale. You're making sales based on relationship selling. And some industries are very much this way, even still to this day. The relationship matters, right? Relationship selling matters. I've sold in industries which were heavily relationship dependent. However, what I would tell you is if you think that you're in an industry where it's all about relationships and building relationships and relationship selling, what I would tell you is relationships are oftentimes what can get you in the door. A relationship or a referral or a good experience with someone else. Building a relationship might get you in the door. But to actually earn someone's business in a reasonable amount of time, again, one of the biggest problems with relationship selling, and by the way, I apologize because I'm only going to spend a little time on this in today's episode. This is another podcast episode where we talk about the different types of sales personalities, of sales types. But I'm using this relationship selling today to create a point to put a bow on today's actual podcast topic. So the problem with the relationship selling, though, very quickly is that relationship selling often drags out and increases the sales cycle. The sales cycle becomes much longer. You lose the ability to ask the tough questions, to push someone, to disagree with someone because of the fear that exists in ruining that relationship. So anyway, we'll get more into that in the future in a different podcast episode. But the mindset of asking the tough questions and of challenging someone, not being afraid to challenge a prospect's thinking, that mindset is the same. And so the way I want to put a bow on today's podcast is I want to challenge you. You may have done a similar exercise, you may have tried something like this in the past. If you've taken our training program, surely you've tried this, you've done this exercise, but it's something that I love, and it's something that you can do very easily anywhere. So it doesn't take a bunch of time or effort or anything like that. But the challenge is simple. I want you to, next time you're involved in a conversation with someone, whether it's a friend, a family member, someone in public, just a random stranger, it could be anyone. It doesn't matter who you're talking to, okay? What I want you to do is I want you to be mindful and focused. I want you to look for an opportunity to get that person to think differently about something. I want you to try to find a way to get them to think differently about something. So this would be really easy if you're if you're in a disagreement with a spouse or significant other. So that'd be a great opportunity to try this. But really, this is something that takes practice. The mindset and the way you approach this as an actual skill takes practice. So I want you to start doing this. Okay, look for an opportunity to get someone to think more critically or think differently about something they're saying now. Maybe it's their opinion on a sports team, right? Maybe it's their opinion on food, or maybe whatever it is. Try to find opportunities to ask someone or encourage someone to think differently, to flip their opinion, to change their opinion, or just to get them to think more critically about it. And so again, an example of this is such an easy challenge. All I'm asking you to do is use some of the lines that I've given you today in this podcast episode. Like, I might challenge the way you're thinking about that, or had you considered this, or tell me more about this, or explain this to me. Okay? So that's 4 examples I gave you right there. Okay? I might challenge the way you're thinking about that. Had you considered Bing? Tell me more about why you think ding. Right? Explain to me what you meant by Bing. Okay? So there you go. That's all you got to do. But I want you to practice this because it needs to come across naturally. So the more you do this and the more you ask other people, especially people you're comfortable with right now, the more you ask those types of questions and you start working on that, it's going to help you also get in the habit of getting your brain into that critical thinking mode, right? You have to also be in critical thinking mode if you're going to, push your prospects to get into that thinking mode. So that's my challenge for you. Take the time to work on this. Do it as much as you can, as frequently as you can. Anytime it comes up or you see an opportunity in a conversation to sort of reimagine the conversation or to get someone to think differently, I want you to practice doing that, okay? That will help you on all of your sales opportunities. And heck, start doing it on your sales calls as well. That's it for us today. If you did enjoy this podcast episode, please do us a favor and share it. Share it just with one person. You can share it with as many people as you like. I'm not asking you to spend a bunch of time on it, but it would be amazing if you could just find one person, share this podcast with them if you think it would help. Not only would you be helping us, but you're helping somebody else as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I cannot wait to see you on the next episode of the Pitchless Selling Podcast. Take care.